Welcome to Regulatory Ramblings. Our podcast today is brought to you by the University of Hong Kong's RegTech Lab, the HKU SCF FinTech Academy, the Asia Global Institute, and the HKU edX Professional Certificate in FinTech, with support from the university's Faculty of Law. I'm your host, Ajay Shamdasani. The theme for today is one we can't seem to avoid lately: geopolitical risk and all the excitement, uncertainty, destructiveness, as well as opportunity and excitement that it entails. And I say that in the wake of recent Israeli and US airstrikes against Iran's nuclear program. In our initial Spotlight segment, we'll be chatting with veteran journalist and APAC historian Christopher Cottrell on geopolitical risk in Thailand, based on what could be that country's 23rd coup, as well as what it means for their recently passed gaming law. Following that, we'll speak to data scientist Haider Mannan, CEO and founder of BigTXN, and anti-money laundering specialist Richard Butler, who's the vice president head of APAC for research and risk at Dow Jones, on what the attacks against Iran mean for sanctions compliance. We'll also be discussing the challenges associated with investment screening and the implications for enforcement of the much-dreaded U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in Asia under the second Trump administration, alongside the equally odious topic of tariffs. But first, in a recent article authored by today's guest in the Christian Science Monitor, Chris Cottrell notes that Thailand could be on the verge of its 23rd coup, following a July 1st suspension by the country's constitutional court of Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra over ethics violations, as a week-long border spat with Cambodia roils fears of a coup d'etat. Chris writes, quote, "Whatever the outcome of the weeks ahead, coup or no coup, the crisis has bolstered support for Thailand's popular military, surfacing deep questions over the army's role in one of the world's most coup-prone countries. Since 1932, there have been 22 coups in Thailand. Most were bloodless, and 13 succeeded in establishing military rule. The most recent was in 2014, when the army ousted Prime Minister Paetongtarn's aunt, Shinawatra. A military junta ruled until 2019, when Thailand transitioned into a, quote, military-dominated, semi-elected government, according to Freedom House. The army maintained considerable political influence until more open and fair elections were held in May of 2023, end quote. Now, as Chris stresses, the political crisis right now threatens to tear asunder 2 years of fragile democracy, reinforcing what some have described as a chronic coup culture in Thailand. And Chris will tell us more about that. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, AJ. It's a pleasure to get on, and I'm calling you from the island of Koh Chang, which is midway between Bangkok and the Cambodian coast. And the island of Koh Chang, which means Elephant Island, was actually the site of a major naval battle in 1941, where the French actually beat Thai's navy for control over the border, but Vichy France had to listen to Imperial Japan. And so Japan set the border, which is why this side is Thailand. Now, that memory is surfaced in two ways. Earlier this year in January, the commemoration of that battle raised some ire in Cambodia because they believe that these are Khmer Islands. And so that started to create a border crisis a little bit that was not of the scale of violence. But on May 28th, at another part of the border up north in the Emerald Triangle with Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand, there was a skirmish over a small hill, and a Cambodian soldier was killed. This has created a major escalation between Phnom Penh and Bangkok over who really owns what along the border. Now, the border here has 7 major checkpoints. It's quite porous, actually, with all kinds of call scam centers. On the Cambodia side, there's telecom from Thailand piped in through the jungle, as well as 20 to 30, some maybe even more, casinos, which are popular for Thais to go to. Now, since last year, Thailand has been trying to get integrated resorts. They've had MGM China, MGM International, Galaxy Entertainment, Wynn, Sands Corporation, SJM even. here with marketing intelligence teams trying to see what would happen if they were to fully legalize gambling for integrated resorts. That has been heavily pushed by the Shinawatra family for many years. This year, under Prime Minister Paetongtarn, it looked like it was going to actually happen until the end of March with the major earthquake, and they delayed the bill from April, and then they pushed it back further over the political controversy with the border to next month. So it still needs to be read in the House and Parliament, but the major opposition groups, now, as well as two major opposition parties, are calling for it to be totally withdrawn because of they're very angry with Paetongtarn for how she handled the border dispute with Cambodia long-term prime minister, now he's president of the Senate, Hun Sen. And she called him uncle and tried to calm him down and blamed one of her generals for the killing. That was leaked on Facebook on June 19th. And since that, it's created this political firestorm that's consuming Thailand and Cambodia to the point where even before she was suspended earlier this week on Tuesday, she called Macron in France to help mediate this. So those are the cards, basically. So you've got Prime Minister Paetongtarn suspended under further investigation. However, on Saturday, she reshuffled her cabinet so she would be made Minister of Culture. So she's still on the cabinet as Minister of Culture, and her deputy prime minister and former Minister of Defense, Thongtan Wichayachai, he's currently prime minister.
Okay. And a little bit about Chris before we get any further. Chris has covered the Indo-Pacific region since 1997, and he's contributed to the Boston Globe, Christian Science Monitor, CNN, The Guardian, Macau Business, New York Times, and the South China Morning Post. In fact, he was former editor-in-chief of Macau Business before I was, and he spent 18 years in China cutting his teeth. He's been reporting on geopolitics in the Pacific Islands and Southeast Asia for the past 4 years, and has authored the UK-based Winner Media's white papers on the Thai entertainment complex bill since 2024. And as he mentioned, he currently lives in Thailand. Now, Chris, notwithstanding its coups and military rule, Thailand has long been regarded as a good long-term bet for investors. It's opened up in many ways, particularly in ways that the West would regard as progressive, such as permitting the sale of cannabis products and paraphernalia, permitting same-sex unions, and liberalizing the gaming sector, which makes many happy punters in mainland China happy. Yet all is not well. I mean, and I know risk is a relative term, and we have a sense of some Asian jurisdictions are more risky than others, but how risky is Thailand for investors and visitors right now? How would you describe its risk profile? Is it a good bet for the future?
I mean, Thai hospitality is famous. Thailand overall is very, very safe for international visitors, unless those international visitors decide to put themselves in situations late at night in dodgy bars. That's really where things can go sideways. Overall, country safe. The policing is very solid. You will find really good deals right now. It's the low tourism season, so you can get fantastic hotels, go swimming, eat good food, get great massage, and look at investment properties. In fact, you're seeing a lot more people looking to retire to Thailand, and they just streamline also the online platform to get a work permit here. And so there's definite progress. The question is, who gets to run all of this profit? And that's where you have the political crisis come in. So if you wanted to build a hotel here, it's great. You've got a labor force that's well-trained and a very strong supply chain of visitors. Now, you'll hear, well, there's a dip to 3% of mainland visitors. Yeah, that's not surprising this year, given the tariffs, given the global economy and other risks. Yeah, there's going to be a little bit of shrinkage, but not enough where they can say, well, casinos will fix everything, right? That's a big argument that's been surfacing recently. Tanks are not in the streets. Even the major protest that I covered at Victory Monument, that was festive. Old people were, sitting on mats. They were eating chicken satay and cooking things and singing. And it wasn't the sort of protest that I saw and witnessed a few years ago with young people throwing smoke bombs in fireworks, at riot police and full armed military charging down the block, right? That is not what we're seeing here. We're seeing a more jubilant spirit of protest and spirited democracy, Thai style. Paetongtarn didn't throw a tamper when she was suspended. She said, "I accept it." We'll know later what the courts do. I'm just catching up on the trial of her father. But again, even that level of political unrest, it's peaceful here. So I'm not worried about it. However, tensions are real on the border. The border with Cambodia, you cannot cross into Cambodia unless you are a Cambodian right now. I saw Cambodians being let in a few days ago. They wouldn't let me in as a tourist. So certainly the disruption of border trade, and when you factor in the kind of money that might be being pushed into the Cambodia border casinos, this could be a lot of money lost. So that could be a bit more of a problem if you're trying to go overland from Angkor Wat to Bangkok or vice versa. You're going to have to fly. So in the meantime, Thailand is very good for investment, I would say. I feel very confident with that. You do need a good lawyer, though. That's for sure. Thai law is tricky. The politics change all of the time. And that's one of the frustrations, I think, of doing business jurisdiction for some.
That is the biggest grievance. People have almost compared it to a place like Dubai, where week to week, who knows what the rules and regs are, because it comes down to the whims of the sheikh. But I mean, I don't think Thailand's king is like that. But
No, he
but I
doesn't.
mean, but
He's
people,
not involved in any of this.
but I mean, people do complain. The rules and regs change so quickly in Thailand. I don't know if I'm on sound footing.
That does stand true. However, there are other ways to read them and react. Again, having a good lawyer does help. I've navigated this and I've seen the kind of ups and downs. You mentioned earlier, Thailand's a bit more liberal with things like the cannabis culture. Well, that was an experiment. And now they are cracking down on that, saying, no, this is only going to be for medicinal purposes, right? So you might have some upset, weed dealers, whatever. But overall, when you're looking at hotels as well as regulations for how big you can build something, that's pretty clear cut. And that doesn't change too often. The oil and natural gas sector is shrinking a little bit. So that also might put pressure on the economy. And you might see from that other sort of blips and blurps as they try to restructure what might work best for their economy. And that's normal, actually.
Okay.
But yeah, certainly I know people who they tear their hair out. I said, "Why are you tearing your hair out? You know how it works here. Yeah, go step by step. You're not going to come in, parachute in, make a quick buck, and then split. The Thais do not like that. They're very traditional, like the Chinese, in the sense that they like to know who you are and they trust you longer. In a family kind of dynamic. So when you're looking at families and politics, which is what we're looking at exactly here with the Shinawatras, you need to look at how family firms and maybe Hong Kong are managed. That might be more insightful, actually, for your listeners.
My sense is that Thailand's the only place in Asia where the Chinese are fully assimilated. And they figured out long ago, if you want to be wealthy and not have to work too hard, intermarry with the upper echelon families, do politics, and that way you can be wealthy and not have to toil as much as a merchant or a trader. And the Chinese have assimilated in that regard. But how much of this is anti-Chinese prejudice? Because I understand the Shinawat family are Chinese ancestry.
Well, I mean, if you compare Cantonese and Thai's number system, they're virtually the same, right? It's similar in Cantonese, which I'm going blank on for those. The Tao Zhou people have had a major influence on the development of Thailand for centuries, right? Before
the Chu Chao fam people, who I believe Li Ka-shing is one of them.
Yeah, and also it goes both ways. When Shenzhen first opened up, CP Group here in Thailand was among the first to invest because of those deep Guangdong roots, right? And also southwestern China, the Dai, ethnic Dai, linguistically, this is where the Thais have migrated from, okay? Down the two major river systems. So in some ways, it really is, it's always have had an influence of China, without question. And then you've got the beautiful Indian Ocean and the sailing and the Tao's and the expansion of Hinduism and Buddhism and later Islam, that really flavor Thai's multiple layers of ways that they can engage the world so effectively, absorbing best practices. The Court of Ayutthaya is a classic case of that, right? That's at the same time as Ming Dynasty, more or less.
So they've got security concerns, possible further border skirmishes on the way, and this is giving rise to uncertainty. What's the impact of that on the gaming sector and the implementation of the new gaming law?
Okay, so one, it still has to get readings, but right now, the coalition that Paetongtarn had of her Pheu Thai party and the Boom Jai Thai party is totally shattered, completely shattered. Boom Jai Thai also had heavy hands in the cannabis industry, and these new regulations have made them very angry. I can tell you that for sure. And then the other largest political opposition party, the People's Party, have called for the bill to be totally withdrawn, completely take it off the table. They're so angry at the Shinawatras, they want this gambling thing killed, right? And that's another element of risk here, is when the figures get too fractious, they will try to tear each other down, if you ask them. So the gambling bill, will it see the light of day reading again in August? Those are very hard cards. I think it's gone. I think this cycle, if you don't have the Boom Jai Thai and the People's Party supporting it, it won't pass.
So the momentum has shifted.
Oh yeah, with literally since within a week and a half.
Okay. As we wrap up, and any closing thoughts, any impressions you'd like to leave our listeners with? You have the floor.
Yeah, I would say come to Thailand. It is a wonderful place to live and work. It has global connectivity. I'm on an island and I can easily use my phone here to call people, no problem. The political situation, I'm not a big investor. I'm just someone who writes and lives in this region. But for covering the APAC area, I like it here. I can see China. There's lots of Chinese who still come here, financially independent travelers with fits. BYD Dolphin cars are all over the place. You can also see lots of travels from South Asia, especially as middle class in India expands. You can listen to the world also closely from the many Muslims who come here and give their perspectives on the dynamics of Israel and Iran, for example, which I believe your other guest is going to talk about. I can pop into Singapore. I can get around the region quite comfortably without too much worry. So even though there's a shifting of chairs, we're not seeing any bloodshed except for the sad killing of that one Cambodian soldier and the economic fallout for poor Thais and poor Cambodians who rely on the border being open every day for their livelihoods. I interviewed a young lady, at 31 or something, who is a noodle stand on the border with Cambodia at Ban Hat Lek checkpoint. And she's like, look, I just want the thing open so I can cook and make money for my family. And I think that's the general sentiment on both sides of the border, even though these ruling houses, the Huns and the Shinawatras and the clashes of others are casting a long shadow over what is a beautiful region that has a lot of potential to grow. And a lot of young people to grow as well. Not just Thailand, but Cambodia, I believe, has 65% of their population is under the age of 35. They're working hard, and they're getting investment in energy from France. China is building a big canal there, and it's a boom town. It's a boom time for Southeast Asia. So hopefully this political crisis will pass. They'll open the borders and figure out who owns which patch of that hill.
One last question is: as an American living in Thailand,
Yeah.
have you found the legal system, to the extent you've needed to use it and avail yourself of such services, have you found it easy enough to access?
Anything I want, I can get here, basically, unless you cross certain like match laws or something like that, which are I'm I'm rather apolitical. I just watch the world, but yeah, no, it's easy. I can get anything I want here, and I speak my Thai is passable, right? Passable Thai gets you everywhere.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time, and we'll have to have you on again. And we're back. In this segment, we'll be chatting about a topic that doesn't seem to want to go away: geopolitics, especially since the joint US Israeli airstrikes on Iran in June. What does it mean for the world of sanctions? We'll be discussing the challenges associated with investment screening, as well as the implications for Foreign Corrupt Practice Act enforcement in Asia under the second Trump administration, alongside tariffs. It's also worth noting that on June 9th, the U.S. Justice Department released new FCPA guidelines saying it would enforce the FCPA firmly but fairly. The announcement was made at a legal conference by Matthew Galliotti, head of the Justice Department's Criminal Division, and he emphasized that the new enforcement guidelines were now in place, and, quote, the Criminal Division will enforce the FCPA firmly but fairly with an eye towards the future, end quote. Joining us to discuss these matters are Haider Mannan and Richard Butler. Haider is the CEO and founder of risk intelligence data provider BigTXN. He is a data scientist and subject matter expert in investment screening, specializing in ESG controversies, global sanctions, and investment restrictions. He sits on the UK board of the Association of Certified Sanctions Specialists. Richard Butler is the vice president and APAC head of risk and research for Dow Jones Corp. In this role, he's responsible for helping businesses with risk compliance strategies, offsetting various forms of regulatory and commercial risk, such as the provision of high quality and accurate comprehensive data for identifying, evaluating, and monitoring various types of risk. Before Dow Jones, Richard was the Associate Vice President for Treasury Services for Australia and New Zealand at JP Chase. There, he had the responsibility for ensuring that all of the bank's financial institution and non-bank financial institution clients in Australia and New Zealand adhered to the bank's best-in-class KYC, compliance, due diligence, and countering terrorist financing standards. He started his career at ABN AMRO Bank, where he was the client awareness and anti-money laundering officer, as well as the sales manager for ABN AMRO Treasury Solutions Group in Dublin, Ireland. And with that, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I'd like to turn to you, Haider, first. Yes, a deal comes along. It's in an emerging market. The returns look good. You're unsure about whether or not to proceed. What are the complexities involved in modern investment screening in Asia, Middle East, or just any of the jurisdictions you worked in?
Thank you. I think, there's always been a point in time mindset that is now being impacted by the, more contemporary sanctions enforcement and monitoring that is kind of taking place in jurisdictions such as Singapore, Hong Kong, and the Middle Eastern markets, where we saw that initially, an onboarding check was something that you had to perform as a one-off. It wasn't a continuous monitoring situation, so any changes in lists and any ownership flips and those kind of things would generally be missed along the way until the next time that entity was screened. I think over time we've also discovered that there was poor visibility of the end use situation in terms of who the actual end user is, where are they domiciled, are they actually entitled to use the service, are there export controls or restrictions that may apply to them. None of that visibility was there, and so in the practice of trade today, whether you're supplying legal services or other types of professional services, be they accounting, tax, or goods such as electronics or semiconductor based goods, you now have to have a lot more visibility of the entire chain from start to finish, and that means a lot more data. It means being able to use that data efficiently in reporting internally, as well as being able to prove the chain to an auditor or a supervisory authority if they had to knock on the door. So I think in all of this, the big takeaway that I think is going to be of real interest is of data and systems in order to be able to keep on top of the the chain of transaction, the chain of order, or the chain of say maritime shipping. All of these chains, as transactional as they may be, have to be monitored from end to end.
I think foremost in people's thoughts are the recent attacks over Iran, and naturally Iran responded in kind to Israel, attacking cities like Tel Aviv and Haifa. Where do sanctions go, say, against Iran or Russia, given that they seem to be already sanctioned to the nth degree? I mean, broadly speaking, could you? I'm just offering that by way of background, but could you talk about any recent changes you feel are noteworthy in the sanctions landscape, given the current geopolitical climate, and also there is the Trump card. What effect will the second Trump administration have on enforcement and certainty?
Thanks for that question. I think, I think at the moment, first off, the bombing and the actions at the moment are terrible to look at on TV, and I think we all wake up every morning in terms to see what's happened overnight, and it's terrible to see things escalate as they are. I'm currently speaking to you from Beijing in China, where we are meeting with customers and also attending conferences. The conference is focused on trade compliance and sanctions, and it's really a key area of focus, in particular in this market in China. But I feel also in other countries in the region where companies are looking to look overseas to diversify their markets and supply chains. And the one thing that they're most worried about is sanctions, and getting added to a list, which will severely handicap their ability to do business. So it remains a great focus for particularly Chinese companies and all companies in Asia, as they're looking to offset the risks of this uncertainty that they're facing in the geopolitical situation. To answer your question on Trump and the impact of sanctions, I think one of the common themes that we can see from Trump 2.0 is a lot of uncertainty. I don't think anyone can predict what he will do. There's so much going on at the moment. We have the Gaza situation, we have Iran, the next week it could be something else that he's looking at, and he keeps flipping. So I think it's very unsure as to what exactly Trump will do. But I do think other countries and regimes like the UK and the EU will continue to focus on sanctions as a weapon of choice, as they want to try and influence and control bad actors on the global stage by trying to limit their ability to do US dollar or other transactions. So I do feel that sanctions are here to stay. It's very much a focus for the companies at the moment. And I think they also have a long-term view. There's a feeling that Trump 2.0 will be over in 3.5 years. Sanctions and risk and compliance in general for corporates will be staying around for a lot longer than that. So I think the companies are taking the long-term view and making sure that they're not reacting to short-term trends.
Thanks for that, Richard. Haider, and anything to add?
Yes, I think Ricky made some very good points there. I had previously spoken to RTHK about a month and a half ago, and I think at that time the situation was still very fluid with the U.S. foreign policy template. We can now see the basic foundation having been laid for what it looks like will be this administration's foreign policy template going forward.
And how would you describe that as simply as possible?
I think it's my personal view in this is that it's very much about deconflicting risk around the world, wherever that risk may be, presenting itself. I think India, Pakistan, over Kashmir was a good example where, President Trump jumped in to intervene, although with less than the kind of preferred result. He did try. And then, of course, he has been tinkering with the Russia-Ukraine talks and then trying to get them to the table somehow. And then the most recent adventure in the Middle East has kind of shown that he has left a mark. As I look at what Mark Rutte had to say on behalf of NATO yesterday, congratulating him and the achievement, it seems that Europe is recognizing that he has made a material difference in containing something so damagous to a 12-day situation with a minimal amount of loss of life and also damage to the physical infrastructure. So if we look at that as then a continuation or what the stream may yet yield from here to the sanctions template, I think sanctions are usually employed as a tool when other measures like say military measures might not be preferred. So in some cases they are the precursor to much more escalated action. And I think that we will see continued use of sanctions, perhaps continued growth of designated entities along this curve, because there's an appetite to reduce military conflict. There's an appetite to reduce that risk. So naturally, you fall back on the mechanism that you most use, and then or the tool that you most use, which is sanctions. So with the Iranian oil situation, and of course the kind of balancing risk here is that China is a large consumer of Iranian sanctioned oil, and I think that that's a situation that continues to perplex the Americans, and then how to kind of restrict the sale of that Iranian oil to the Chinese. But it's also something that was mentioned at the NATO summit yesterday, to say Trump was actually giving the benefit of the doubt to the Iranians, and he said, look, they're going to need money to put that country back into shape. We want to see that happen. Those are his words. We will soften the restrictions on the sale of Iranian oil. So he is showing us that there's a relaxation of U.S. sanctions, indicative of let's say soft approach to letting the Chinese continue to purchase Iranian oil. I don't think this has happened in the history of sanctions thus far, that a president has actually taken to the world stage at a NATO summit to make these kind of pronouncements, which is in one sense a show of empathy, in another sense a show of a veiled threat to say, look, we know this is the case, and we can, whenever we would like to, put a stop to it. But for now, we will let you, or we will permit you to kind of selling your oil, and then go ahead and rebuild your country with the proceeds. I think in other areas they would be less inclined to do so. So I think when it comes to particularly the sensitivities around the semiconductor world, the proliferation of US semiconductors into the Asian markets via Singapore, and those chips and things, there is a lot of reluctance to let that happen. And there I think sanctions will become an even more useful tool to control that risk of technology falling into the wrong hands.
Well, he's a grand gesture president, and certainly he's doing his part to earn his Nobel Peace Prize, what Obama was handed on a silver platter just by virtue of being elected. Trump wants to stake his legacy and really get that Peace Prize. We'll see what happens. There was a recent case, and I think you might know what I'm referring to, when OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, which is part of the U.S. Treasury Department, sanctioned entities, companies in Hong Kong and China that were involved in transferring Iranian oil to the mainland. Are you aware of that case?
Yes. I believe the company was CICC, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
Yes, and then the shipping fleet was sanctioned because of certain vessels that were going dark and carrying out this dark ship-to-ship transfer of Iranian oil and then supplying it into China and places. Yes. So yeah, that case is again quite interesting, right? Because, for example, if I look at Singapore, as a jurisdiction that very much wants to abide by the international rule of law, respectful of the various sanctions that are in place, and meaning well to control those. It was the case, I think, that less than 100 kilometers off the shore of Singapore, these dark ship transfers were kind of taking place. And I think the finger was pointed at the Singaporean authorities for not doing anything about that. And so the Americans stepped up and, they kind of sanctions this the company that was responsible for the shipping of these loads of oil out of the Middle East and then repurposing it for delivery to other places in the world. I've always maintained that the regulators are becoming sharper. And again, I go back to my point about data, right? So the amount of surveillance now that can be done without human intervention. So a good example of this is looking at satellite imagery of entire swaths of the ocean, for example, identifying ships, where AI can very simply tell you a great amount of detail about a vessel just by looking at the aerial photograph, right down to its registration details, its capacity, and all those kind of things. And then if you gave this AI a series of inputs over a course of, say, a month, where that vessel could be tracked without even knowing its transponder location, you're just doing it simply by judging the imagery. You can plot the course, you can plot the map for where it's headed. You can look at interactions that it's had with other vessels along the way. You can even perhaps gauge amount of time spent, parked in a location without even knowing how long the transponder was switched off, just by looking at imagery. And then you can deduce, the kind of conditions under which, a handover or takeover may have taken place. So the number of vessels that you have to monitor previously through human augmented means was a lot more, and so you need an army of people to be researching this. And now, with the abundance of tools that we can simply deploy, in a matter of days, you can publish a report and say, look, here are 300 vessels that we definitely know are doing bad things. And then, of course, the regulators are not just, sitting on their hands. They're looking for these alternative data sources. They're looking for these alternative ways to, find wrongdoing, and then, augment that with their enforcement process. So we will see a lot more of that. I think because of the alternative data that is available, there's nowhere to hide, especially when you're on the wide open ocean. There's nowhere to hide. Just on that story, by the way, it really surprised me. But then I can't really say why or why not. But a Russian warship passed through British waters over the weekend, completely undetected. And why I'm sharing this story with you in the context of what I've been explaining is that there are also ways to disguise yourself. There are ways to be able to, position yourself where you may not be considered a threat or a danger, especially in places where you're not meant to be, or where you're not meant to have access.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Haider, you're a data scientist. Ricky, you're an AML guy, and I mean you're both knowledgeable about sanctions. But Haider, I'd like to start with you and then come to Ricky. My from having spoken to people in your industry broadly defined, my sense is that the view is that their attitude is that being a data scientist matters more than that's necessarily substantive knowledge uh, of financial crime investigations or sanctions investigations or the black letter law involved. That you can essentially have your teams led by data scientists, and because at the end of the day, it's about discerning patterns through large droves of data and pulling out the exceptions. Um, what are your thoughts on that? That is the day come where da you can basically call compliance a subset of, data science, or is there something to be said for the investigative skills that sanctions and financial crime professionals possess?
I think it's very much over the last decade become a game about data primarily, and of course, call it a data scientist, call it a data engineer, in the various guises.
And to be fair, the people that are making the data science over AML expert argument have tended to have been techies. So I'll just make that clear.
Okay. I have no wish to go to war against Ricky here on this topic, but look, I very much enjoy and I'm passionate about what I do. What I've seen happening is that data has shown us a lot of promise in terms of what we can discover and what we can, use in order to be able to monitor or surveil processes that are either, you know, um, buying and selling processes through normal trade, or trading processes within banks, where you're trading, buying and selling equities or debt products, or
By
whether it
by the
is.
way, by the way, sorry to interrupt, but my sense also is that there have been disappointments and failures when it's come to using AI and sanction screening as well. So we the record is not perfect.
No, it isn't. But as I'm saying, whichever process you look at, there's an enormous amount of data generated alongside that. The means and mechanisms by which to interrogate that data later on, because at the time the trade is being done or the deal is being signed, or all of these things are being put together, as I said, it's usually a point in time type solution that you employ once, and then it gets filed. Now, for the continuous monitoring part of it, it took a lot more of computational resources, human resources, and the rest of it to be able to work through large masses of data, be it post-trade trades or filed agreements between a buyer and a seller of, say, a building or a resort complex or a hotel, shopping mall. Then imagine all the different types of languages used, the different types of legal constructs, the jurisdictions upon which these agreements are based. It would take a lot of human effort and then that was if you suspected there to be a risk within a certain silo, and a very small silo at that, is when you could open an investigation, get the necessary blessing to do that, or the authority to do that, and then work in tandem with the investigators or the authorities to be able to uncover any wrongdoing. And then these investigations lasted for many, many years. The UK is a great example of an area, especially the NCA and the our kind of crime agencies here, who take decades to investigate wrongdoings, and then those cases cost the taxpayer millions upon millions every year, in a never-ending spiral. So we are cutting away from that. We are moving to an area where the opening and shutting of a case should be much more efficient, because you're using the machine to discover a lot more information about the the retrospective wrongdoing, but at the same time, then taking that and presenting that to the authorities, who are also now using contemporary tools, and then investigating these cases on a faster timeline to close them out. The backlog, I think, still exists, and I think it'll still take many years for that backlog to be cleared. But when it comes to data science, that is really the force that is bringing that investigation to a fore, and making it workable from an enforcer's perspective.
Richard, your rebuttal.
Yeah, I can see what you're trying to do here. You're trying to picture myself and Haider as a AML guy and a data scientist guy to see who
Hey.
comes out from top.
If it sells, right?
I think back in the journey that compliance has taken over the year. I've been in this role for 18 years, and I've really seen the industry grow from screening a selected number of customers against a selected data list that we would provide, essentially a list of bad guys or potentially risky guys, and that was a structured file. When people started talking about adverse media, and they said, you need to check your customers to see if their name is mentioned in the media for negative reasons. At the very beginning, that was thought to be impossible. I heard the phrase, it's like trying to boil the ocean. You can't screen your millions of customers against all the news in real time. But it turns out that you can now, and people are doing it. And as Haider has said, there's more and more data coming around every single time. So I don't think like anything, I think teamwork and cooperation is the key. Data scientists enable the AML guys. They can point out the advancements that are made. They can point out the AI and how to improve processes and to improve the efficiency of your team. So I think they work very much hand in hand. The speed at which AI is advancing in Gen AI, I think, is allowing compliance officers to crunch a lot of the data and do a lot of the heavy lifting automatically. And it elevates the compliance officers to being able to add that layer of authentic intelligence, which, AI for Dow Jones is not just artificial intelligence, it's authentic intelligence where, you do need the human involved in that. I think AI enables the compliance officer to be more efficient and more effective. So I think they're both key, both essential, and I think working together is really important for banks, corporates, and providers like us to make sure that we have the data scientists and the tech guys working very closely with the compliance guys, because no one should be working in a silo here. So I think it's a team approach. So I'm sitting on the fence on this one.
All things considered, it's probably going to end up being a lot like FATCA. It ends up being an interdisciplinary approach, and even financial crime teams have people of all backgrounds. So, and that brings us to the dread of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and I'd like to get your thoughts on the implications for Asia, especially with Trump 2.0, tariffs, and the prospect for regulatory retaliation from the rest of the world. I mean, but let's deal with the FCPA first. At the start of the year, the Trump administration announced they were going to hold back on enforcement. Recently, they've announced they're going to be, again, firm but fair in enforcement. That caused concern amongst groups like, say, Transparency International and others, that the U.S., which the longest time been the bulwark, the most resolute enforcer of such rules globally, was giving up the fight. What would that mean for the battle against bribery, fraud, corruption globally? And for us, now that they've issued their new guidelines, what does it mean for Asia?
In the region, people are keeping an eye on very closely change. And Dow Jones, our company, still is providing our data and services to customers who are still looking to offset the risks in relation to FCPA and other bribery laws around the world. I think this announcement, and you came out that they're going to be firm but fair. I think it provides a little bit of clarity. So I think customers are happy that now the foreign policy direction of the US is being settled a little bit, and we can see where they're going and what they're doing. And it's very much linked to Make America Great Again and America First. I think Donald Trump does not want US companies to be the focus of these investigations. They want the focus of the investigations to companies that are competing against US companies.
I wanted to mention in response to what you were saying about the U.S. is now, going in the direction of America first. Trump doesn't want American companies being hassled by these rules. They want to focus on companies competing with the U.S. There is then the concern that it's going to lead to selective enforcement against foreign companies. Could you address that, please?
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting. I think, the first thing to note, I think, is that the bribery laws remain unchanged. So the UK Bribery Act remains the same and the FCPA remains the same. So it's just the enforcement that was put on hold. And I think
only the U.S. has the extraterritorial means to enforce its will globally.
Well, yeah, exactly. But I think what we're seeing with the announcement that they are going to be firm but fair, I think this means that clarity is being provided. So people now understand a little bit of the direction of the US foreign policy, as Haider mentioned earlier. Um, our clients, in terms of the experience that we have talking to our clients, they're not driven by trends in regulation or enforcement. They're driven by the desire to operate globally and to do so without falling foul of various regulations, including FCPA. So I think it's the customers who are already doing FCPA compliance practices will probably continue to do so. I think any serious company who's operating internationally are probably doing that already. But the implications of this might be that there is a focus on companies that will be, or countries, foreign companies that are competing against the US. So maybe for companies in Asia in particular, which is my remit, I think it will probably increase the focus on FCPA over the next while. But our customers, as I said, they're not driven by trends, and they do look at these things in a long-term view. And what goes up must come down, and these things change. Trump will be gone in 3.5 years, and there'll be a different drive and a different focus. And there's always a retrospective look on these activities. So I think the companies that we're talking to, I think it probably won't change too much for them.
Okay, last question, and it's more on the macroeconomics front, but it's tied to what we've been discussing today. What can we expect on the tariffs front?
Iris, yeah. Oh, that's old news. That's last week. This week we've got new news. It's in.
Given how whimsical Trump is, he could whip it up at any moment. So that's what people are concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. It still remains a concern. And you could see how quickly the tariff escalated between China and the US. And I'm not sure where we are in the 90-day reprieve. It will escalate like it did with China, but I think both countries quickly understood that is not the way to move forward. The impact is that a lot of countries in Asia are looking to diversify their supply chain. They are looking for new markets, and they're actively looking to do so. I think at a macro level, geopolitically, you can see other countries are looking to diversify their dependence from America with regard to military. Canada announced a security pact with Europe. So people are looking to generate new friendships and partnerships to offset these risks. The threat of tariffs hasn't gone. Ultimately, it could lead to some bad situations. It will lead to goods and services costing more. The cost of these tariffs, even though the administration insists that they don't, but they are passed on to the consumer. So ultimately, for the end users or your listeners in Hong Kong or wherever they are, they will have to probably pay more for goods and services if this does continue. But I'm hoping that they do see sense in that tariffs are not the way to go forward. It will stymie international business, and it's not good. So in this world of uncertainty, I'm not sure when it will come back, but it's definitely not gone away, and it's something that we need to keep an eye on.
Okay. Well, last as we wrap up, and I'd like to give both of you a chance to have the last word. Any closing thoughts? Anything you feel we didn't address? Anything you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I'll go first. Just
Yeah.
in terms of some feedback and what's on focus to large banks and corporates in China and in Asia at the moment. They're very keen on developing new markets around the region and around the world. And they're very keen on ensuring that they don't fall foul of any regulations. So they are employing all the data, employing all the products and services that they can to ensure that they can highlight and identify any risks and offset those risks. So the world and China definitely needs to continue doing business with the rest of the world. So I do think that we are in a time of change, and I think it's a very interesting time. But in times of uncertainty and change, there's always opportunities as well, and I think we can see people busying themselves trying to search out for these new opportunities. So interesting times.
Haider?
Yes, thank you. Since we started with the topic of investment screening, I just wanted to kind of finish on that too, to say, look, most failures in any screening process, any breaches are usually process, kind of failures and not policy choices. They happen in the seams between business units, IT systems, or transaction stages, areas where no single person sees the whole picture. So closing those seams and mending that kind of workflow means turning sanctions checks and investment screens from a one-time gateway, as I've been saying, to a more continuous data-driven control that travels with the order, the payment, the service for as long as they live. So those are my closing words to this podcast.
That's well put. In fact, I do think that with the right data, continuous monitoring can be made very effective and more efficient than even periodic reviews. So yeah, that's we mustn't forget the emphasis on data. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's great to talk to you today.
Thank you, Ajay.
And to our listeners, thank you. Until next time.